I am so excited to share with you my wonderful guest, Lee Harrington. Lee is an award-winning author and an internationally known educator who whose subjects include transgender rights, spirituality, bondage, mysticism, paganism, and the combination of all the above. So thank you, Lee, for being my first very honored sacred guest. I really appreciate that. Lee teaches classes on Wednesdays, and check out the link for his schedule so you can sign up for his delicious stuff. I think Lee, to me, represents a mystic, poet, pixie priest. Whatever that means to you. And I am really looking forward to reading one of your books, particularly Sacred Kink. And I've heard really good reviews on the Shibari you can use. I have a friend that really loves that book. And then your most recent book, is this correct? Traversing Gender, Understanding Transgender Realities.
Yes, that came out a few years ago, and it was, thank you first for having me on the show. Like, I am so incredibly grateful to get to be here. And writing Traversing Gender, as somebody who is transgender, for folks who don't know me, I was assigned female at birth. And I was looking at all of the books out there, and they were either intimidating or made assumptions about who the audience was, right? Assumed everybody was white, or assumed everybody was middle class or upper class, or made these different assumptions of what this thing called transgender looked like. And so I wrote a project that about 2/3 of the book is the project. The last third is all resources and tools for everything from therapists to people whose children are going on gender journeys. And I'm so honored that Andy Fogart, who's an amazing cartoonist, teamed up with me to include not funny comics, but engaging artwork to have that de-stress some of the conversation.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because it is a challenging conversation, because so many people just don't understand. It's beyond their comprehension, which is why I want to have these kinds of conversations, right? And why I'm so appreciative of you joining me, because, I believe that we hate because we don't understand, because we can't relate. And once we hear that person's story, then we can find points of connection. And so this is my small way to bridging the gap to world peace, right?
And you talk about that idea of not understanding with transgender awareness. The example I like to give that a number of people do have experience with is that people in your life might have had profound other changes, right? For example, profound weight loss or weight gain. And if you have a picture in your head of what that person looks like, and you meet them again 5 years later after gastric bypass surgery, and you're like, wow, I wasn't emotionally prepared for this new vision of you, because what's between my ears is different than what's in front of me. Or maybe you have a friend who went by one name for ages and then they got married and changed their last name, but you're still fumbling because you got used to their old name from before. Right? It doesn't make you bad, but it means that you still need to change your game up because they go by this new name. Mm-hmm. And to me, those kinds of things of where the story between our ears or the thing our tongue is used to come up are ones that almost all of us have gone through, whether you've engaged with transgender experiences or not.
Oh, I love how you just put that, framed that for us. That's super helpful, because you're right. So many people have gone through, I'm not the same person I was 10, 12 years ago.
Right. None of us are.
So, it's do you think some people really get caught up on the name and the pronouns,
Yeah. Or even how you think you're associated with a person or in your own story. So I know this guy named Larry, and Larry for years was a lawyer. Right. And one day decided, and this is a simplification of the story, obviously, but decided that he was going to go off and become an artist. But he'd been a lawyer for so many years that people just thought of him literally as Larry the lawyer.
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And that moment where it's like, wait, what do you mean you're not a lawyer? Now I have to reframe my entire story of you, as well as the story I say of my friend Larry the lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because my own perception of not just this person, but how I relate to them is totally different. And I know for myself, so I'm 41 years old and I decide to medically transition. And I want to clarify that because when medically means that I'm choosing to go on hormones or seeking surgical interventions or things like that. And not all people who are on a gender journey, and I use that language because there's so many different things that get called transgender. It's a huge array of experiences. And for a number of years before that, I knew my journey, but I wasn't interested in changing my legal name, right? Legal transition, changing the piece of paper that your government says you are, right? And I didn't want to pursue medical interventions or medical procedures, but I knew my journey. And so my husband knew, some of my best friends knew, but for people who hadn't known me on that depth and emotional level,
Mm-hmm.
it felt like it was out of the blue that I came out.
Yeah.
And that was shocking. But for other people, like, yeah, we've known this since you were a teenager. This is not new. Right? Going to my mother, I said, so I've decided I'm actually going to pursue this. She's like, cool, what am I calling you? Because she knew that this was part of my journey when I was younger, and I decided not to pursue it at that time.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to see as well these other people who weren't my closest humans, who were so shocked, or other people dear to me who have shared finally what's been going internally with people who are their closest humans, who've had those people feel so hurt because they're like, well, why didn't you tell me earlier? Because they were processing. They weren't sure what to do.
Right. It's a very deep personal
Oh,
journey.
yeah, absolutely. As I would argue, gender is for every person, not just transgender people. For yourself, figuring out what kind of woman you want to be.
Yeah.
Instead of like the cookie cutter of what's like, you're not going to be necessarily June Cleaver or Claire Huxtable. Which woman are you going to be?
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting because, as far as me being a woman, I always knew that I didn't fit the norm. So I might as well just do my own thing anyway. That's kind of been my lifelong dream.
No, seriously, I love that so much because people project onto women what the story is of womanhood.
Yeah.
And then without pausing and going, no, Temple Grandin is a woman, right? Like saying that, Margaret Thatcher was a woman. There's no one way to be a woman. And people have different opinions about all of those individuals, right? But this story of how we should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. It's toxic for everyone.
Everyone. And honestly, I believe a lot of people are talking like the transgender among kids, and the popularity with it right now. And it seems like it's increasing. And so there's some talk and people are concerned, whatever, that it's just like a fad or a phase or whatever. And I'm like, well, number one, that doesn't matter. Like, this is the journey that they're on. We have to accept where they're at today. Right. And then tomorrow we can figure that out with them as well. But aside from that, I think they're here to help break down some of those constructs of masculine and feminine and male and female. And I'm now walking into stores looking, why is there a male department and why is there a female department? Aside from fit, I get that, but and the fact that there are still gendered bathrooms, to me, that I'm starting to take that almost personally.
Well, I mean, we're starting to open back up with COVID to different types of public venues. And I'm going to name, when I was a woman, how bitter I was about the fact when I was at sports games that the woman's queue was around the corner and out the door to find a restroom. Yeah. And the men were just going in, out, finishing their stuff. And I'm like, can we just have single stalls and then group areas to wash our hands?
Yes.
It would be easier for everyone. And when you talk about this notion of it being a larger population of folks who are coming out as somewhere on a non-heterosexual, right? So people who are coming out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or non-sexual, people who are like, I'm just not interested in sex. It's not my thing. I don't want to date anybody. It's not my thing. Because they're in that spectrum too. Or people on some sort of gender experience, everything from enjoying playing dress up to individuals that go, no, really, I think I was born in the wrong body, and everything in between and beyond. When people say it's new, it always reminds me of this one client / student that I had. And they were in their late 60s, early 70s. And they played dress up in their mother's. There was somebody who was assigned male at birth. And they were found wearing clothing that felt better to them, that was wearing their mom's clothing. And they were beaten for it because they were a boy. And so they didn't talk about it until their wife died 60 years later. And so I think there's a story that says this is new stuff. I think what's changing is there's now words for it. There's now people in culture that we can go, oh my gosh, I'm like that person, but not quite, but at least I have someone closer to me. And there's not as much fear of physical retribution.
Yes.
And I think between those three, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we hear horror stories about, the abuse of trans people, as particularly trans women, and bullying and abuse. And it's frightening, like particularly for parents watching their children go through that, and like wondering what are they going to experience,
Right. Yeah, exactly. A lot of parents just want to say, I want to love you, but gets heard sometimes by transgender youth as what you're doing isn't okay. It's not what those parents are communicating or trying to say, but it's sometimes how it's heard, because what they're saying is, I don't want you to get hurt. You shouldn't do this. As compared to, I see that you're doing this. How can I help you not get hurt?
Yes. Yes. Big difference. Yes.
Yeah, they sound really similar at first, but the second one says, I love you no matter who you are and where you're at. How can I share love with you and change society so that you don't have to be afraid and I don't have to be afraid for you?
I love that. And I honestly think like there's so much public conversation around this now and we're able to see more parents doing that very thing, that showing that unconditional support. I know those parents probably still have questions and concerns and all that, but I love my kids. Like I have 3 children, and I honestly don't care like who they want to be, as long as they're good people. Like, that's it. I just want them to be happy, make their contribution in their own way, and whatever. Love who they want to love. I don't care. But it is challenging, like having a certain degree of let go and let them have their experience sometimes.
And for any parent with their youth,
yes,
because they're going to be on whatever their journey is, and you can support them however much, but they're going to do them.
Yeah.
Whatever they look like. And it could be about that love. It could be about gender. It could be about politics. It could be about their hobbies, that you don't understand why they love math so much, but I guess I'll support you going to math club. I'm lost and confused, but okay.
Oh, this is fantastic, because it's like you're creating the conversation to a level of normalcy that I have not experienced before in this conversation. Like, I love that it just doesn't matter. Like, it's just a person, and it's just a journey, and we can look at it any number of ways, but it's just a journey.
Exactly. And in transgender, like in academic dialogue, and this language has seeped out into culture at large without all of its context. There's these terms called heteronormativity and cis normativity. Heteronormativity means that the culture you're in, whether it's a family group, right, or a city or a country, right, your community, or your religious group, whatever it is, assumes that it's normal to be heterosexual and everything else is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the same thing with the word cisgender. Cisgender just means cis is same in Latin. Cis means whatever you were assigned at birth by the doctor or the midwife or your legal paperwork is how you identify. Right. So cis. And it's the parallel to trans. Trans means across. And so cis normativity means that we assume that cisgender is normal and everything else is deviant or unusual. And so I think for me, if we break it down from these normativities to going, everybody is their own flavor of human. Mm-hmm. How do we support them where they're at? Because that same cis normativity tells cisgender men, so men who are assigned male at birth, tells them that penises that are over this, like under the size of 4 inches, is somehow bad.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and invalidates it. Tells women who have one breast larger than another that there's something wrong with their body, when that's incredibly common.
Yes. Right? Yeah, literally every woman that hasn't had breast surgery.
Right. But these same things that are toxic for transgender people are toxic for everyone. Like, wouldn't it be great is if, like, for me, as a transgender person, especially before I changed my legal paperwork, but going into a hospital or a doctor's office, being able to write down legal name / insurance name I go by. Mm-hmm. Because it helps me, but it would also help somebody who, I think of my former husband, whose legal first name was John, but his father's legal first name was John, and his grandfather's legal first name was John. Everybody called him Adam, to the point that if somebody called John on the phone, we knew it was a telemarketer. And so we went to a hospital room when the people were like, John. He's like, he didn't even hear it because he's never really gone by that name.
Yeah.
And so that same piece, that same extra line on a piece of paperwork would help him just as much as it helps somebody that maybe was assigned John at birth, but now goes by Jeanette. It helps everyone. And so to me, I look at all of these issues and go, how do we make the world for everybody? Because let's level up excellence on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you, when I first approached you, you said you wanted to share something about your journey, that like before you transitioned medically, you met some resistance. Is that?
Yeah. So when I was a kidlet, right, when I was young, I was one of those, like, if you visually read me, people wouldn't have known what gender to read me as.
Okay.
And I refer to it as reading because when you're across across the street from someone, you're reading based on your own assumptions, yes, not on somebody's actual, biological and or personal realities, right? All I'm seeing is the gift wrapping.
Right.
And I was that chubby, gender awkward kid. And when I had my first boyfriend asked me, well, wait, the way you interact with me, because he was bisexual, the way you interact with me and the way you interact with the world, like, it really feels like you're more of a teenage boy. And I'm like, are you sure you're not transgender? And this is back in the 90s, right? Early mid 90s. And I said, well, I can't be transgender. I'm not a guy who wears dresses. Because that's the only thing I'd seen was like, the Jerry Springer show, right? That's all I'd really been exposed to.
Yeah.
And when I went to a therapist, because my mother was like, hey, if that's where you think you might be at, I want to support you. You're my kid. That's what I care about. And let's have you talk to somebody. My therapist decided to turn me down because I wasn't going to become heterosexual, because I was also bisexual. And it was, if you're not going to become normal, we're not going to support your journey.
Wow.
Yeah. And because I like playing dress up. right? Like I like being a drag queen on occasion, or I like having fun with wardrobe. I was in theater. I was a theater, like playing with dress up is just fun sometimes.
Yeah.
And between the two, she said, why would we approve the creation of somebody who's sexually deviant or different? We are approving transgender people. Hear that word, approving?
Yeah, that's
Right?
disgusting. Yeah.
Because, and that's still, and that's still the case in large parts of the world, is
Yeah.
if you're not going to become normal, why would we approve you? And yet, like, that's the case for me. When I look at it with my gender, it's like, oh, and so I waited 10 years to even approach the question again, to seriously approach the question again, until I was an adult and was able to speak up for myself. Because, and by then also some of the diagnostics and diagnostic manuals for therapists had also shifted into being more inclusive of a diversity of journeys. But I really look at it and examine for myself, where do I unconsciously shut people down because they don't fit my story of the norm?
Oh, that's such a valuable question. Oh my God.
Yeah, like, as somebody who is a spiritual journeyer, where have I said, oh, yeah, like, not necessarily to them,
Yeah.
but where in here have I thought, oh, well, they're not really a blank, whatever blank is. They're not really insert thing here. Oh, they're not really a vegan because they eat honey, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
A number of unconscious judgments we carry. And having done this work exploring my gender stuff and examining what my journey to here looked like, it's really given me this gift, I feel like. And maybe it's not, I have these moments where I'm like, do I just put a silver lining on everything? And I think for me, it's important for us to name when things against us were unjust, yes, or continue to be unjust, and to also look at where things, when I have received injustice, how can I not pass that on to others?
Yeah. Yeah. That's transmuting.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just life alchemy.
Serious. I mean, it's real. It's real. And if we talk about the alchemical properties, right, if we shift into that psychology, if we talk about the alchemical properties of changing one element into another, what are the things that transmuted it? Is it pressure? Is it heat? Is it time? Is it energy? Is it investment? And if we're talking about alchemy, excuse me, of the spirit, is it also challenges or bliss or advantage or disadvantage that also lead to those same places?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I call myself an alchemy love coach because I do my best to approach this world from this place of how can I love more? Like how can I share loving kindness in this world? And how can I create that change that I want to see? But also like taking those little piles of shit that just happens in life and turning those into golden nuggets.
Yeah. And to me, there's something beautiful in that, in the form of, how to phrase this. So sometimes one of the things that I find happens in culture, this is a side shifted to kind of go where I was going. I've had sometimes we use language like turn shit into gold, for example, of what you just said, tells a story that only what is gold is valuable.
Yes, but shit's valuable too. Just ask the garden.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you for picking up exactly what I was laying down. Yes, exactly. Like that there is this story of that certain things are more valuable than others.
Yeah.
But what would it be like if we valued people where they're at and helped them move to whatever their excellence looks like, their journey forward?
Yeah. And
that's, I think, where some of my curiosities and creativities come from in this world is I think of myself very much as, both an author and an educator, but also as an instigator, right? That's very much my thing, whether it's coaching or whether it is doing small group sessions or doing large group intensives, like these things of diving into instigating our next possibilities. And looking at our possibilities also includes where are we going and what will fertilize that. And sometimes living in a capitalist society, gold is an excellent answer. Gold pays for my electricity bill. I'm all for it.
You know, rent is real.
Rent is real, right? We don't work off the Cascadian dollar, which bases itself off a loaf of bread. We are not in that current economic framework.
Right.
But if where your fertility of possibility is going to lead is growing a garden of your own desires, taking your shit and processing it into the dung that can serve to grow that garden, let's help you do that.
Yes.
Because handing you a pile of gold is not going to grow a garden.
It's so true. Unless you can pass it off to someone else who'll do it for you.
Or you're buying a whole lot of fertilizer or whatever it is. That's fair game.
We create what we can create. Oh, so fantastic. I'm curious, is there anything else like that would help the layperson to understand more about not just supporting those that are having this experience, but also just in general, how soon did you know? You said you stopped thinking about it for 10 years, but how soon did you know that you weren't cis?
So everybody has a different answer on that. I've met some transgender people who knew as soon as they could use words. That literally, like I know a trans man that I use, and for people who are confused about the language, man means who they are. Transgender is the story of how they got there, right? So I am a man who happens to be transgender, right? And so I know a trans man, and this man, when he was like 2 or 3, looked down and went, why don't I have a penis like all the other boys? Like knew it as soon as he had language.
Yeah.
And even had what gets called dysphoria about it. And dysphoria doesn't just affect transgender people. It's looking in the mirror and going, this is wrong.
I think dysphoria affects so many people.
Right. And dysmorphia being when you hyper focus on that thing to the point that it becomes debilitating. Mm-hmm. Right. Folks that I know, for example, that are in the anorexia spectrum, where it's not just I look in the mirror and it's wrong, but I am so fixated on the detail of it that it ends up taking over my life. So I know people on that end of the spectrum. I know somebody else who, again, until they were in their 60s and they heard the word gender fluid and the word gender queer, and they went, oh, because they'd never heard a word for their experience. And so suddenly they were able to go, oh, because they knew they weren't a transgender woman, but they also knew they weren't a cross-dresser, but they also knew they weren't the average guy. But until they heard a word for it or saw someone else do it, it suddenly opened up a possibility.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And for people who do Tantra or people who do sacred sexuality, all of these moments are possibility models that open up. And it's not that you could never have it found on your own. It has that awakening moment because it was already there. For myself, I had just not thought about gender until I was, 13, 14 years old and had that, experience with my first boyfriend who asked that question. And I went, wow. That's a question I've literally never thought about. And so I end up sitting down and talk, and he found me another transgender man to talk with. And I said, wow, this might be me. I need to look into this. It wasn't an instant jump. It wasn't me being like, oh, I met a trans guy, I'm immediately going to go do that.
Right.
When I say when I was turned down at 16 for hormones and for pursuing a medical transition, when I say I didn't do anything, it's mostly that I tried to put it out of my head for an extended period of time, but I still played with gender. I hope whoever that is okay. I still played with gender in the bedroom, right? Or I still on Halloween's dressed up as a guy or male character. I still had it be part of my experience because it was still part of my experience. And I explored with different words. It wasn't that I, suddenly wasn't actually transgender and now I'm using all these weird things and fandangled new terms to come up with new stuff, because I do meet people who aren't aware of what transgender journeys look like.
Yeah.
And go, well, that person said that they were bi gender for a while, and now they're saying they're gender queer, and now they're saying they're transgender. I'm just lost. Make up your mind already.
Yeah. They're demi something or other. Yeah.
Right. The parallel I think of is for people who have ever done the first 4 years of a university, have ever done a bachelor's degree, it's your first 2 years, right? Where you're like, okay, maybe not you, but at least I had these moments where I'm like, okay, I'm going to go in and build up to getting my MFA, my master's in fine arts. And about 6 months in, I'm like, yeah, that's not a good idea for me. I don't want to be a full-time artist. That sounds like a horrible gig. Once I'd explored it, right? And I was like, okay, let's look more at understand the history of art and really pursue that direction. And then a couple months later, I'm like, you know what? I have no interest in being a full-time historian or academic professor in a university. I don't want to pursue tenure. That's not the path I want. Right. And that it might look to somebody's parents who are going through this, looking at their 19-year-old being like, just make up your mind already. What's your degree going to be in?
Yeah.
Those first 2 years in college are those children/adults, people who are on that cusp of new adulthood, figuring out what their next steps look like. And sometimes you don't know until you take a step into it.
So true. So true.
And naming that same parallel, I do know transgender people who choose actively as a valid choice never to, quote, transition, to either legally transition, medically transition, or socially transition, i.e. come out, right? Socially transition is coming out. Who choose never to because something else matters more to them in their life values and life purpose. I know somebody, for example, who was really active in their Christian congregation. And for them, their heterosexual marriage and their congregation had them sit with the question of, this congregation has flat out said transgender people are evil, bad, and wrong. But I have all my community here, and I love all my people here. What am I going to do? And that's not an easy question. Because for some people, the answer is come out, be authentic, do you. That's what matters. And for other people, it's the college equivalent of saying, you know what? Yeah, I want to be a full-time artist, but I'm going to become a lawyer. Because I know if I pursue that track for 30 years, I can take all of my open time and spend all of it on the arts. I have consistency of income. And when I retire, I will have no fiscal concerns around being able to travel around the world studying every artist.
Yeah.
It's a valid and real choice. Now, examining why you did it, right? If you did it from that active, empowered state, fantastic. If you did it because your father guilt tripped you into becoming a lawyer, different question.
Yes, yes.
And I look at gender very much the same way. Why are you doing it? Where do you want to come from? And are you making those decisions from your place rather than some sort of shame?
Yeah, absolutely. I think shame is the noose around all of our necks. It's like this chain that just holds us to the wall. And I think more people have it than don't, and they just don't recognize it for what it is.
Yeah. I also would like to name that both of those metaphors you just offered are ones that are deeply traumatic and painful for people who have different skin colors than either of us do.
Yes.
And so they are easy to use sometimes as white people to use metaphors like it's a noose around our neck. But if I do want to name that because it can cause distinct and powerful and horrible effects on our lives, but it is different than societal racism.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because we haven't had to experience that. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. But to name, though, that shame is debilitating and toxic and affects every single one of us, that is powerful to even acknowledge it, because seeing it is one of the early steps towards changing that.
We have to see it and name it in order to shift it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when people say, why do we have to keep coming up with newfangled words for all this gender stuff? It's because we have to see it and name it. And by naming it, I can look for peers who can walk with me on this journey, which, as a note, if somebody's watching and you have a loved one who's on some sort of gender journey, they might not be available to answer all of your questions. But if you have the label of parent of transgender youth, you can now find other parents of transgender youth to talk to about these things, because you have a word for your experience. Or coworker has come out as a transgender woman, what do I do? You can now put that into Google or whatever search engine you use and find other people who can answer those questions, because it's not all like that person's on their own gender journey. They might not have answers for your specific question. It's like for me, when I was writing Traversing Gender, I had to do huge amounts of research because I'm not a transgender woman. I'm not. And I'm not a transgender woman who is Black and been incarcerated. These were types of life experience I didn't have exposure to, which meant it was my responsibility, in my opinion, if I was going to teach about any of these issues, to go and do the work, because myself being transgender has nothing to do with me suddenly downloading all of transgender history and knowledge.
Right.
It's not real. It's like somehow saying, somebody has their first period and they somehow understand all of womanhood and all of feminism and all of the realities of suffragette movement. It's like, no, you had a period. It's a first step as somebody who has had my first period. Like,
I have, side note, I have a dear friend that just had a baby, and we've gotten into the discussion of the things that they don't tell you about pregnancy, childbirth, and having a baby. Well, all that stuff is incredible. Like the things that they don't say that maybe they could, that might be helpful.
I remember there was a book that was out, I think it's still in press, that said how to have your first child as if it were your second.
Oh, wow.
And it was an entire book of this one woman downloading all of that kind of stuff. Like, I wish they'd told me.
Yeah.
That,
I mean, you know.
How to hold a baby.
Yeah. Yeah. My friend was like, I can't believe they let you just walk home with these things. Yeah, it's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Right? And unfortunately, when it comes to gender too, the number of people who will start a gender, like say transition, we'll go with a binary gender, which is not real. There's a lot of people who are many genders at the same time, or don't identify with gender at all, or agender, or people that I know who are move between genders, or who are non-binary, i.e. gender's kind of a meh, and it's not how they identify with the world, or they might be androgynous. There's so many realities, but let's pretend there's only two. We're just going to do a role playing for a moment. The number of transgender men, i.e. people who were assigned female at birth legally, who are now men, the number of them that I have met that end up becoming assholes or alcoholics or workout obsessed or misogynistic or whatever it might be, happened for them because it's the only male examples they had in their life. Because when they were becoming male, nobody told them, oh, by the way, this is how you carry manhood home.
Yeah.
No one told them the variety of empowered manhood and healthy masculinity there is in the world, knowing that manhood and masculinity are different. I know a number of feminine men and a number of masculine women, right? But like, to just offer the healthy manhoods out there, like the goodmanproject.com, like they do such amazing work in helping men become healthier men, because they never had a chance in growing up as men to learn the tool sets from their wounded fathers and wounded grandfathers.
It's such a great resource. I'm so glad you named them. I've been following them for years, and they just do such good work.
Absolutely. And I wish, again, everybody's on a gender journey is one of my like personal beliefs. I wish everybody examined their gender. Wouldn't it be great if every woman you met had a chance to look at why they wear the clothes they wear,
Mhm.
why they talk the way they talk, why they've chosen the careers they've chosen? And if they still choose to follow society's tropes, fantastic. But if not, how do we do the alchemy of the spirit to pull up our authentic truth and don it like a garb of our own power?
Mhm.
Right? To me, there'd be such, if everybody had a chance to do that, not just trans people who get told, like, oh, you're so obsessed with your gender. It's like, no, I'm just doing this heavy lifting that you haven't had the chance to do yet.
Yes. Well, I think honestly, we could all just give a lot more space to each other for
Mm.
having these experiences, whatever they are. Um, but also, my experience as a seemingly cis hetero woman, right? Well, perception is everything. Am I really? um, but you know, I love wearing men tailored clothes. Like it's like Marlena Dietrich is my
Mhm.
ultimate ego, right? So, you know,
Oh.
assuming anything about anyone is a mental construct and is one of the things that we need to break through.
Mm.
Looking at you or I and assuming that we're straight or bi or gay or any of those things is fundamentally a block.
Yeah. Rather than saying this seems to be a person, I wonder what their story is.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and even words like straight, gay, bi, transgender, cisgender, those are all white, originally or originated oftentimes in white American language, and specifically English speaking American language, even if we drop the racial experience. But race does affect it because words get used differently in Spanish American combination language, and or when I'm in spending time around certain Black populations I've been in, like there's words that just don't exist, like aggressive, which is a spectrum word that can mean everything from butch lesbian to transgender man. And that's not a word that I have in my vernacular in how I operate. But I have a lot of my families on the big island of Hawaii, and there's this term that's called mahu. And mahu is a gender slash role in society. And it's people who are assigned female at birth but have more man in them than many men do,
Mm-hmm.
or people who are assigned female at birth but have more woman in them than most women do.
Mm-hmm.
And these individuals, the role of them, like there's a societal role that says they are the keeper of histories. They are the knowledge bearers. They are the people that are able to walk in spaces that others can't. To the point that literally when Captain Cook and that whole team was trying to settle in Hawaii and trying to take away culture step by step, people who were mahu were ended up like taken away from places where there was concern that they could get killed because they were carriers
Mm-hmm.
of culture. In the
Yeah.
United States, we don't necessarily have that, right? There's not a role for transgender people. There's a story of what role for woman is. There's a story of what role for man is,
Yeah.
neither which are necessarily healthy.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
there's not a story, and to me, I have to remind myself that my experience speaking in the United States in English language is a specific experience that doesn't reflect worldwide. So if anybody here is watching or listening to this and you hear different uses of these languages when you're hearing stuff out of India or you're hearing stuff out of the Philippines, or there's other words for these things based on cultural journeys as well, because culture and gender overlap a lot.
Yes, yes. I was reading a fictional novel that was Indian, and the main character was a trans female,
Mm-hmm.
and it was interesting to see how that culture, the Hindu and Muslim cultures in India, treated trans people. and how they looked on them like they didn't want to hurt them, according to this novel, because they were considered good luck.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't necessarily respect them either. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, so it's really, really interesting to see, like, another perspective. Like you said, I personally would love to, like, I devour that kind of stuff. I would love to learn more about how other cultures relate to this. Like, I
Mhm.
know of, in some Native American cultures, the twin spirit or the two spirit people, um, and how valuable that was, much like the wisdom keepers that you mentioned in Hawaii. And like if we could just hold some reverence, more reverence for each other, I think the world would be a much better place.
Yeah, and I appreciate specifically that you said some Native American tribal experiences, because with over 500 registered tribes in what still stands as the United States that was once Turtle Island, or still is Turtle Island, but is held, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, my tongue is tripping over those languages, so thank you for bearing witness to me attempting. I value that. But in some of these tribes, it is not a positive thing.
Right.
And in some of these tribes, it is a revered and cherished thing with a sacred role. And two spirit coming out of two different tribal experiences, one in Ottawa and one in the North Plains, that was developed and brought into common language and picked up because at the Gay American Indian Alliance gathering in 1990, there was a discussion around the fact that these words, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, the first three are orientations, i.e. who I'm into. The fourth one is me, who I am. Like these four words were not words that kept into consideration all of the realities of different tribal experiences. Right? Even concepts of what societally normal women or men do, again, for remembering that normal isn't real.
Right.
Whatever that cultural trope is, shall we say. And to create a term where people can say, I am somewhere in this spectrum and beyond, and you have to understand my full experience as an Indigenous person to understand what this truly means to me. I think that is such a stunning concept.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons that I love growing up, I was really involved in the goth community, right? Dance and culture, etc. And I was talking with somebody else from that community, and we were like, yeah, no, everyone wearing eyeliner. Eyeliner has no gender when you're goth. When you're dressed head to toe in black and everybody's growing their long black hair out with their black eyeliner. Long hair and eyeliner have no gender. Hell, long skirts don't have gender. Right? And to look at how these subcultural experiences inform our story of gender too, I think is so important. And for each of us to look at what cultures am I in right now? And how is that influencing my way I live? Like how I express my gender, right? Yeah. How I show it day to day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very important to break down like how culture has influenced everything about our thought process and our identification and our beliefs and all those things, like, because there's just so much when you start looking into culture. There's just so much programming, so much. It's like a lifetime of deconditioning.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly it, which is why the difference between I'm not racist to I am actively doing anti-racism work and deprogramming and reprogramming my own brain to acknowledge the amount of shit that I was fed by my family and culture unconsciously. That's a different statement.
Completely different, and different energy.
And well said. Yeah, exactly. And so with whatever we are looking at, gender or how we experience our interactions with other people or our orientation or the careers we follow or how we interact with our bodies or whatever it might be, what are we doing today? what are we looking at from our past to see where that came from? And then what are we doing to deconstruct it and choose or not choose whether we keep doing it,
Yes.
whatever it is. I mean, something as simple as I know what I like to eat for breakfast. Well, do you really know what you like to eat for breakfast, or is that what you've been used to doing since you were 6?
Maybe salad might be okay. Who knows?
Well, you have a cultural story in your
Yeah.
head that says it has to be a carb or a sweet or eggs or bacon because that's American story of normal food. But when I went to Turkey, no, it was blocks of feta cheese and granola and thin yogurt and olives.
Mm.
And it was fantastic. And now granola and yogurt is like my go-to. And sometimes cheese, because just cheese. I know I have an addiction issue. But
like, you know, it's horrible. It's horrible addiction. It really is. And I'm on board with the granola and yogurt. Like, that's my favorite, actually.
Right, but to look at that, I mean, cultures worldwide, some that don't do breakfast, some that eat large amounts of protein and meat in the morning because you've got to go out and do construction and do work in fields. Ones where miso soup with different toppings in it is a common breakfast food. But where have we made assumptions around what food in the morning looks like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you know, we've been talking a lot about gender, and that's not to be confused with the energies of masculinity and femininity. And I think a lot of people have a lot of assumptions and ideas and beliefs around those too, and confuse those with gender. And I just want to differentiate. I just want to take a moment and say, your gender is not the energy that you put forth into the world. And it's a constant, like you said, an exploration, much like this identity of who I am as a person, as a woman, as anything, like how I'm presenting myself in the world, that the masculinity and femininity, that's my own personal process and part of my expression, but it's not indicative of my gender expression.
Right. In the same way that you can have masculine men, feminine masculine men or feminine men, et cetera, et cetera. There are people I know, though, for whom their amount of, femininity that they carry in their body on an ongoing basis has had them choose walking in the world having had a gender transition of some sort, because that is how they want to express on a daily basis, and it has informed their gender.
Yeah.
Right. So it like, when we say they are two different things, they are, but I think they also cross over sometimes in our own internal system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know when I switch gears a little bit and I'm more in my feminine brain, I present a different way than I do when I'm more in a masculine brain, like the way I operate in the world, the way I think, the way I communicate, the way I dress, totally different. Whether I'm leaning more towards femininity that day or leaning more towards masculinity that day.
So your expression changes, even if necessarily your core sense of gender doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to be leading rituals at both Alberta's Dragon Fest, which is their major pagan festival up there, as well as at Dragon Fest, which is down here in Colorado. For both of them, it's one of those interesting things doing sacred sexuality rituals online. It's like, okay, I've had to learn this skill set over the last year and a half. And I'm going to be doing rituals for both of those festivals for the sacred beyond and between. Because they've done sacred feminine rituals and sacred masculine rituals.
Yeah.
But what about people who are agender but are just as sacred?
Yes.
What about people who are truly androgynous and are just as sacred? What about people who dance actively back and forth, no matter their gender, but are equally as sacred?
Yes.
And it's been interesting seeing in various sacred sexuality or pagan or Christian or any spiritual traditions of any sort, seeing people start to acknowledge the divinity that can come from seeing the diversity on the planet. Because if we say that individuals that are intersex, i.e. born with some sort of combination of sex traits, right? Maybe they have different gonads, Maybe they have different presentation, different hormonal experiences that happen during puberty, whatever it might be, right? Different alignments of genitals. And intersex creatures exist in every single species worldwide. Every, right?
Isn't that amazing to think of? I mean, that's just amazing to think of.
Yeah. And I've had people who are like, oh, clearly there's just occasional chemical flukes. And I'm like, well, maybe, or it's part of the design.
Yeah.
And I mean, intersex is biological reality. So I do not want to say that intersex people and transgender people are the same experience.
Right.
So I do know some intersex people, because of culture, have transitioned in some way, right? Because they were read as female for a long time and they have chosen to take hormones to be more in alignment with some part of them, right? Like that sort of thing. So there is some crossover. But what I'm trying to express is that this idea that the diversity of the universe is vast.
Yeah.
And what if we acknowledged and named the power that comes with seeing all of these pieces, not just the ones that are easy to put stickers on?
Yes, yes. So going back to what you were talking about before, when you were saying like these words, they help us to kind of figure out who we are and identify our experience right now. So that's how they came in handy, or they come in handy along the way. But it's really important not to take it on as a label, or assume that just because that's who I am now, that that's who I'm going to be 5 minutes from now. So, that the idea of like, okay, so saying like one is bisexual, right? Well, again, that's who they could identify with or identify as long as they have that language. But until they start figuring out like another way of being, well, maybe they'll figure out that they're pansexual. So, but if we stick to, but I'm bisexual, then it creates like this mental construct that prevents us from exploring that other.
Yeah, I look at labels as examining whether these are being used as walls or doors.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
And for some people, actually, the answer is no. I've known I was bisexual since I was 9 years old. And they're now 90 and they're still bisexual.
Yeah.
Right. Knowing, as a note, the word bisexual is an evolving term in current culture. For some people, bisexual means I'm attracted to two binary genders, men and women. I am not attracted to androgynous, multi-gendered, agendered people, right? Or non-binary people. For other people, bisexual means my gender and other gender.
That's right. A great differentiation. Yes.
And so to know when I'm talking with someone and they're sharing their experiences, even if they're using a word I think I understand, I don't actually necessarily know what that term means to them.
Yes.
And I ran into that when I was writing Sacred Kink. When I like just even having the discussion with people where I'm like, okay, let's start with the word sacred. And I got like 40 answers of what this definition was. And I'm like, okay, what about this word kink? Another 112 answers. And I'm like, okay, how do we have this be both a conversation we can still have and yet acknowledge the vast array of sexual activity, desire, interest, which again can cross over or not. I know people who are homo-romantic, right? They want to romantically court people of their same gender, but are heterosexual, right? Yeah. So even what we assume these lineups are.
Yes.
Right? But with Sacred Kink, it was so interesting to talk with people about, for example, is receiving a spanking something that you do to get turned on, something that you do for having role play to get to work through like as a therapeutic experience? Are you having that spanking because it's a way to connect with a partner? And whether it is sexy time or not has nothing to do with the picture. Or are you doing this because this is actually a physical challenge and you want to have an ordeal and have that catharsis at the end of it? And so even when I was having conversations with people about one activity, you can't, like, I found that I could not take that one activity and assume where it plugged in, because I can't know someone's why unless I ask them.
Ah, thank you. Because I say that so much like we have just a litany of assumptions in the way that we operate in the world, and we don't know anything until we ask. Nothing, like, and there's like a number of things going around, like in this, especially like in the spiritual community, right, where like some cisgender women are like, well, my partner should just know some things, it's like, even if your partner were a legitimate paid mind reader, they shouldn't just know. They should ask, and you should tell.
Well, and I mean, that word should is tricky. I was once given a joke that I think I still hold on to, which is don't should all over yourself.
Yeah. Or anyone else.
Or anyone else, right? Because having somebody ask you a question and you answer it sounds so easy. It's not always an easy skill set to build.
It's true.
It takes practice. And so I have some people that I have, erotic encounters with in my life who go nonverbal because they are in that place of that space between, right? They're in that liminal space of erotic experience that erotic experience can deliver to a person. And so for them, if I sit down and go, do you want higher or lower? They're just like, meh? Like there's just no words. And so to ask them to come out, like, how do I feel about that? And how do they feel about coming out of it to answer verbal words? And so what are our tools for communication and growing and learning together is how I kind of expand that out. Is it sharing stories? Is it not in the moment of erotic bliss that we're having like a show and tell time, right? Is it, which could be fun, right? Suddenly I feel like I'm back at summer camp. Right? Is it show and tell time? Is it going to classes? Is it reading books? Is it teasing each other with dirty stories? Or is it in the middle of erotic desires, having somebody say, just 1 centimeter higher, right? Or grabbing your head and moving it. There's so many ways to do these things. And so the question becomes, if we are 2 of us or 3 of us, I don't know the size and configuration of our erotic relationships, but like, what works for these communication tools so we all, again, level up?
Yeah.
Right? How do we do this so that all of us thrive in this and delight in connecting with other beings, or as a note, connecting with ourselves? Because this learning process happens in our autoerotic and like the energy that can transmute within ourselves in how we move it either up and down our chakras or how we move it up and down energetic bodies in general, but through the shifting through our own internal gender experiences, like all of that stuff, right? What's our internal self-communication look like?
Yeah. And many people just don't even really have that.
Yeah.
Like, not consciously anyway.
Right.
Yeah. Whew, so much. I love it.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been delicious.
I so appreciate you. I appreciate who you are in the world and how you're showing up. And thank you.
Oh, it's been a delight. And if people want to track me down, my website is Passion, Passion, and Soul, Soul.com. And Passion and Soul is also my Instagram, is also my Twitter. It's all of those things. So I'm fairly easy to find. And like you mentioned earlier on, I'm doing donation-based Wednesday classes every single Wednesday, though I also am offering anywhere from 1 to 3 other courses across a variety of places and time zones every single week right now on everything from exploring gender and transgender experiences and sacred sexuality to looking at teaching skills or examining how to tie up somebody for the first time. Like, it's a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. And do you also take private coaching clients?
I do. And there's something so delicious about helping people either explore their own gender and ask themselves those tricky questions, and to be there as a mirror that happens to have resources.
Yeah.
Or to help people level up and to help people figure out, oh, this is what do we do? How do we do it with safety and with love?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Thank you again for showing up how you show up. That's fantastic.
It's been a delight. And thank you for continuing this series.
Mm-hmm. Mwah.
Mwah.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.